Right, so welcome to another deep dive. Today we are looking at Donald Trump's recent rally at Madison Square Garden. And this one was not your typical campaign stop, let me tell you. Sources are painting a pretty interesting, uh, wild picture even. I mean, we're talking like Hulk Hogan wardrobe malfunctions, people shouting Antichrist.
Uh,
There was even a self-proclaimed Gothic Maggie fan there.
yeah.
But beyond just the spectacle of it all, there's a lot we got to unpack about the rhetoric
Right.
specifically and like the impact it could have. Lucky for us, we've got our expert here to help us kind of connect all the dots and figure out what the bigger picture is.
Always happy to be here. Yeah, I mean, this rally definitely grabbed a lot of headlines, but I think the real story is how this reflects on, bigger trends we're seeing in our political landscape.
Right, right. It's not just about the theatrics. And one of the biggest controversies I saw was uh, it was comedian Tony Hinchcliffe's set, and he made some jokes about Latinos that did not go over well, and even compared Puerto Rico to a floating island of garbage at one point.
Yeah, that's right. And that joke especially, like it's interesting when you think about all the history there, right? Trump's relationship with Puerto Rico has been strained, definitely, since Hurricane Maria. And his administration, they got a lot of criticism for how they handled the whole disaster, and especially for all the delays in getting aid there. So I mean, it's like that joke landed in an area that was already really sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to all of that, like to make things even more complicated, the Trump campaign even put out a statement after all this,
Yeah.
saying that Hinchcliffe's jokes uh, do not reflect the views of Donald Trump or the campaign.
Mm.
But if that's really true, then why didn't anyone, even Trump himself, address those comments or condemn them even, like during the rally?
Right. Yeah, it's definitely interesting that silence. I mean, it raises a bunch of questions. Was this just like like a case of bad judgment, or could it mean that there's this tacit acceptance of this kind of rhetoric, within the campaign?
Yeah, for sure. And that brings up another thing too, uh, the impact it could have on voters, especially in the Latino community.
Absolutely. I mean, an incident like this could definitely alienate some Latino voters,
No doubt.
especially ones who already have concerns about Trump's policies and his rhetoric. It also, I mean, it kind of plays into this larger trend we've been seeing, this normalization of inflammatory language in our political discourse. And that has some pretty worrying implications for our democracy as a whole.
Right, definitely. And speaking of inflammatory language, we got to talk about Trump's actual speech. He said "enemy within" a lot to
Yeah.
describe Democrats.
Right. And that's like, a classic political tactic,
Mhm.
division and demonization.
Yeah.
Basically, you portray your opposition as like a fundamental threat, and it creates this us versus them mentality, which can be pretty potent, but also, pretty dangerous too.
Yeah, no kidding. It's kind of unsettling,
Yeah.
especially when you consider what people like, the former Chief of Staff John Kelly and the former Joint Chiefs Chair Mark Milley have said. I mean, they both labeled Trump a fascist and a potential dictator.
Right. And those warnings, we can't just ignore those. I mean, history has shown us again and again how this type of rhetoric can really erode, like the norms of democracy. And in some cases it can even, it can lead to authoritarianism. So it's not something to be taken lightly.
Definitely not. Yeah, it really makes you see how different their approaches are.
Yeah.
On the same day as this whole rally thing was going on, Kamala Harris was on like her 20th visit to Pennsylvania, meeting with voters and even released this whole detailed plan to support Puerto Rico's economy.
It is interesting, isn't it, to see these campaigns operating so differently. Trump's busy rallying his base, using all this really emotionally charged language, and Harris seems to be taking this much more like strategic approach, targeting specific demographics and really focusing on actual policy
Yeah,
specifics.
it's like they're playing completely different games almost.
Exactly. And her choosing to go to this Puerto Rican restaurant and unveil this plan on the same day as the rally. I mean, that was no accident. It let her counter Trump's message directly with a message of inclusion and support.
And the reaction from the Puerto Rican community was pretty quick too. We saw these huge names like Mark Anthony, Jennifer Lopez, even Bad Bunny, all came out in support of Harris after that rally.
Yeah. And, those endorsements, they mean a lot, both symbolically but also politically. It really shows this strong sense of solidarity with the Puerto Rican community. And I think it could have a real impact on Latino voters who are, like a really crucial voting bloc in this whole thing.
That's a good point. It's also interesting that Trump held this rally in New York. I mean, New York always votes Democrat. And I even read that none of the 7 Republican New York congressional candidates in any of those competitive House races,
Mm-hmm.
none of them were even there at the rally.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's definitely something worth noting. It might suggest that even some Republicans are realizing how much damage this kind of rhetoric could do to their own campaigns,
Yeah,
especially in places that have really diverse populations that
yeah.
might be trying to, like, distance themselves from it.
Yeah, it could be. And while all that was happening in New York, Harris was zeroing in on Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
which, everyone considers to be a battleground state, meaning it could swing either way in the election, and it's got a pretty big Puerto Rican population.
Right. Yeah, her being there and then releasing that plan for Puerto Rico at the same time, that seems very calculated to me. By addressing the issues that this demographic cares about, she's showing that she understands their needs and their priorities. It's classic targeted campaigning.
It really is. Makes you think about the strategies they're both using.
Definitely does. And it makes me wonder which one of these approaches is going to work better in the end. Will voters be swayed by all this emotional stuff, or are they looking for actual plans and a message that's more unifying?
Yeah, I mean that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I guess it'll depend on a lot of things like, voter turnout, how the economy's doing, even just the general political climate at the time.
Yeah, for sure. And the media coverage of all this will play a role too. How they frame the whole narrative and what they choose to focus on. That can really affect how the public sees both of the candidates.
And speaking of media coverage, there's been all this debate about their role in all this. Some people are saying they should be calling out all this hate speech and holding politicians accountable for what they say.
Yeah, and that's a really complicated issue. On the one hand, the media they have this duty to report everything accurately and fairly, even if it involves controversial figures or statements. That's really important for a democracy to work properly.
Right. But then there's this other concern too, that by giving a platform to this kind of hateful or divisive rhetoric, they could be normalizing it and making it more acceptable.
Yeah, it's this really difficult balance. They have to give context and analysis, but they also have to avoid amplifying these harmful messages. And in the end, it's up to each of us to be critical about the information we're taking in. We have to, be discerning about what we choose to read and watch and be willing to challenge these, hateful or divisive ideas whenever we see them.
Yeah, it's not just on the media's shoulders. We all have a responsibility.
Exactly. We need to be informed, engaged citizens and hold our leaders accountable for their words and their actions. It can't just be passively consuming information. We have to be active. We have to engage with it.
Yeah.
And be willing to have those tough conversations.
And that includes being able to see the tactics that are being used to divide us, like that enemy within rhetoric that Trump used at the rally.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. If we understand how these tactics work, we can be more resistant to them and help to create a more positive and productive political environment.
And it really feels like we're at this turning point. Like the whole foundation of our democracy is being tested or something.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate way to put it. I mean, this level of division and just pure animosity in how we talk about politics, it's unlike anything I've seen, in recent history at least.
And this rally, like the one we've been talking about, it just seems to really embody that whole trend. It's almost like a microcosm of all the bigger issues that our country is facing right now.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It definitely highlights those challenges that we have as a nation, when it comes to having civil discourse, having respectful debates, and just finding some kind of common ground.
So where do we even go from here? Like, what can we do to push back against all this divisive rhetoric and try to encourage a dialogue that's more constructive, more productive?
That is the question, isn't it? It's the one we should all be asking. And honestly, I think it starts with us looking inward, examining our own biases, our own assumptions about things.
Right. Being open to hearing perspectives that are different from our own and really trying to understand where other people are coming from and trying to find that common ground even when we disagree,
Exactly. We can't just stay in these echo chambers where all we hear are things that confirm what we already believe. We need to have real conversations that challenge us and help us understand things better.
Yeah. And we can't let our leaders just get away with it either. We have to hold them accountable for the language they're using,
Yeah.
for the messages they're sending. We can't let them just use divisive rhetoric to get ahead politically, you know?
Absolutely. We deserve better from our leaders. We need to demand a higher standard from them, one that puts unity and respect first ahead of all this division and fear-mongering.
Yeah, I agree. You know, this whole deep dive it's been really eye-opening, and it's definitely clear that the stakes are really high right now.
Hmm.
And we all have a responsibility to protect our democracy and make it stronger.
Couldn't agree more. It's time for us to come together as a nation and reject all this division and hate.
We have to remember what unites us as Americans, those values of freedom, equality, you know, opportunity for everyone, and we have to work together to build a society that's more just, more equitable.
And that starts with every single one of us, right?
Yeah.
We all have a role to play in shaping the future we want.
Well said.
Yeah.
You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one question to think about. What can you do to promote a more civil and constructive dialogue, like in your own life? How are you going to challenge those divisive words and really champion the values of inclusion and respect? It's something we all need to think about. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.